What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the May 29th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have a 7-game main slate tonight. We had a 5 or 6-game early slate, depending on which site you play on. Didn't do a show for that. We had weird start times. It was just a weird timing, weird set of games. So just talked about that in Discord with my Dub Club subscribers, but we are going to walk through the 7-game main slate tonight. 50K to first again on DraftKings, 20K to first on FanDuel in their flagship tournament. So still pretty nice prize pools tonight. And we have cores on this slate. We have just a pretty interesting slate in general, I think. Pitching is not ideal. I took my first glance at the pitchers that are showing up for me, and it was not pretty. There are a lot that are playable. They just aren't exactly the best. So should be pretty interesting to walk through that. As always, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, give the show a like, subscribe to the channel, get notifications when my shows go live, comment on the video. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Now, starting with the Nats taking on the Atlanta Braves, we have Mackenzie Gore on the mound for the Nats. We have Spencer Schwellenbach on the mound for the Braves. Schwellenbach is making his major league debut, called up from Double-A. He made 2 starts there this season. Prior to that, he had not pitched above high A, so really no idea what to expect from this guy. Obviously, the range of outcomes, no matter how good you are, is very wide when you're going from 2 games at the Double-A level to pitching in the major leagues, skipping over Triple-A entirely. You can see here that the projection systems on FanGraphs project for like an 18 to 22% strikeout percentage. Split the difference, call it 20%. Not a great strikeout matchup against the Nats. Does seem talented. I mean, obviously, we don't have a lot to go on in the minor leagues, but the fact that the Braves were comfortable just jumping him straight to the major leagues already makes me think he's probably pretty good from a talent standpoint, but still not somebody that I'm likely to be getting to all that often on this slate because he is $7,500. I do expect there to be some sort of a learning curve, some sort of a gap for him as he gets his feet wet in the majors. The matchup itself against the Nats isn't great. So at 7,500, projected for about 5% ownership, showed up about 5% for me. I think he is playable, again, because the pitching on this slate isn't exactly good, but doesn't look like any sort of a priority. On the other side, Mackenzie Gore is showing up a lot for me. He's showing up, or projected at least to show up a lot for the field as well. The matchup against Atlanta is obviously difficult. They're a good offense, but no Ronald Acuna does make this lineup considerably weaker just because of how good Acuna is. That's not to take anything away from the guys that are still in this lineup for Atlanta, but they are just a weaker lineup without Acuna, and Gore has made strides this year. He's been very good. 27.6% K percentage, 3.25 xFIP, and maybe most importantly, he's only $7,700. So it's not like you're paying any sort of a premium for him. And then also, as you'll see as we talk through some of the other pitching, you are paying a premium for some of the other quote-unquote top pitchers on the slate. So getting Gore at this price does mitigate a decent amount of the risk going up against Atlanta. That's not to say he's safe. It certainly isn't, but you have to take what you're given on a slate like this, and Gore is one of the more talented pitchers. He is reasonably priced. You do get a more favorable Atlanta lineup without Acuna. So I do expect to be getting to Mackenzie Gore quite a bit. I think you can also get to the Braves, but the Nats are showing up more. Not really surprising given how inexpensive they are. $5,400 for CJ Abrams. We know that is a perfectly fine price tag for him. Gives you stolen base upside, which is really important. Gives you home run upside, obviously, is important. So he looks good. And then the rest of this team is just very, very inexpensive. Ruiz at $2,400 at catcher is a nice value option, batting 5th. Lane Thomas hitting 2nd, nice value option. Garcia is reasonably priced. We know Gallo gives you home run upside in addition to a lot of strikeouts. Rosario is still cheap, batting 6th. So the Nats just look like a good value stack. They are showing up 5th most in all stack types in the lineups I built, 5th most in 5-mans. And I think that makes sense going up against Schwellenbach. As I mentioned, not a lot, not really any sort of sample. 16 total games in professional baseball. 24 total games in professional baseball, 2 above the Double-A or at the Double-A level. So pretty wide range of outcomes there, but the pricing on the Nats certainly looks good. And the hitters, at least at the top of that lineup, really aren't bad either. For the Braves, they are interesting in tournaments because the lineup does get a little bit cheaper without Acuna. They're obviously not as good, but they're a little bit easier to stack when you don't have to deal with getting to him. And you are getting negative correlation against one of the more popular pitchers on the slate in Gore. Certainly a very good pitcher, but there is still a lot of talent in this Atlanta lineup. So far this season, Gore has held lefties to a 100 expected ISO. Righties are at 130. Not numbers that you want to pick on. If you go back to the start of last season, though, he has given up a bit more power. 191 expected ISO to righties over that time, 176 to lefties. Now, again, I do think Mackenzie Gore has gotten better, and this is a highly regarded pitching prospect, part of the Juan Soto deal coming over from the Padres. So it makes sense that he's going to improve year over year. I'm not saying that you just can look at what he did last season and say, oh, yeah, he's going to regress back to this. But the truth probably is somewhere in the middle between what he has done this year and what he's done going back to last season. So you do get that negative correlation. And it's always nice when, normally when we talk about getting to a negatively correlated stack at pretty low ownership, you're talking about teams like the White Sox or the Rockies or these really bad offenses that people are always going to pick on with pitching. It's nice when you can do it with the Braves, even without Acuna. Still plenty of talent in this lineup. So both stacks here are interesting to me for different reasons. Atlanta is showing up less than the Nats, which I would expect. More difficult matchup, less favorable pricing, but they do get that added component of stacking against a popular pitcher and having a lot of upside. Next, we have the Blue Jays taking on the White Sox, who obviously I had just mentioned. Alek Manoah is going for Toronto. Chris Flexen is going for the White Sox. A bunch of ownership coming into Manoah at 8,300. Times have certainly changed. I have no idea what to make of this guy in general. He was very, very talented when he came up. Then he looked like he just might not be in professional baseball for much longer. So far this season, he's been fine. 23.7% K percentage, 4.3 xFIP. He has still allowed about 2 home runs per 9 innings, but it is a good matchup with the White Sox. Pretty good strikeout matchup. They rank 11th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. 81 WRC plus on their active roster is the worst in Major League Baseball. So pretty good price tag, good matchup. I don't have any issues with Manoah at 22% owned. You can see here I got to around 20% in the lineups I built. So I think the field's pretty much correct on that one. On the other side, Chris Flexen, 5,300, not getting any ownership. He showed up in a nice chunk of lineups for me. I don't think he's somebody that I end up actually playing that much, though. Keep in mind that this is showing you just the total percentage that he showed up in lineups that I built. It's not lineups that I've, gone through and decided, oh, these are the lineups that I would play in tournaments or anything like that. I think what it's basically just telling you is that he is going under owned because he's 5,300. He's really cheap. You can get good bats around him. But typically what's going to end up happening for me, and I think for most players, is the lineups that have Flexen are going to just kind of get filtered out because you can end up getting lineups that have a similar range of outcomes, similar upside, similar projection by just finding some value bats instead of using Chris Flexen, especially in a pretty tough matchup against the Blue Jays. Not a good pitcher by any stretch. 17% strikeout percentage, 4.8 xFIP this year. The Blue Jays are a tough matchup. They're ranked 25th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, 104 WRC plus. So again, I don't think Flexen's actually a particularly good play here. I would say he is underpriced, but I would say that about literally any starting pitcher that's $5,300. The bats here are going to be interesting. The Blue Jays in particular, not surprised to see them showing up a lot, both for the field and for me. Flexen, again, just not a very good pitcher. And there are a lot of talented bats in this Toronto lineup, and they're pretty affordable because they haven't hit all that well so far this season. As I mentioned, collectively, they have a 104 WRC plus, but you expect better numbers from a lot of these guys going forward than you've gotten year to date. You have Davis Schneider with multi-position eligibility leading off at 4,400. That looks good. Connor Falefa with MPE hitting 8th as a value option if you need it. Then you get Guerrero, Bichette. Alejandro Kirk is back at 3,100. Dalton Varsho, 4,600, looks pretty good. George Springer, sub 4K, even though he has not gotten off to a good start this year. Flexen, since the start of last season, has allowed a 242 expected ISO to righties. Not exactly what you want to see if you're going up against Vlad Guerrero and Bichette and the right-handed power in this lineup. Lefties have a 161 expected ISO over that time. So that's not to say you shouldn't be playing Dalton Varsho, but the Blue Jays, their flaw isn't the right word, but I'm going to use it. Their flaw in their roster construction is how right-handed heavy their lineup is. So going up against a pitcher like Flexen that gives up power to righties, 185 expected ISO this year, 242 since last year, like I said, certainly sets up nicely for the Blue Jays. On the other side for the White Sox, kind of like I was saying when I was talking about the Braves, you certainly can make the case for stacking them in especially larger field tournaments. When you have a pitcher as volatile as Alek Manoah getting 22% or so ownership, there is upside, especially on a relatively small 7-game slate, to saying, okay, well, what if I just knock off 1/5 of the field? The White Sox are cheap. I can build really good lineups around them. All of that being said, it's not a high probability spot. They're not a very good offense, but you do get some value here. Corey Julks is leading off at 3,200, so nice spot in the lineup for him. Nicky Lopez doesn't really have power, but he is 2,300 batting second. Gavin Sheets does have power batting third with first base and outfield eligibility. So I think especially at the top of the lineup from a value standpoint, you can certainly make a case for getting to some of these guys. So far this season, Manoah has, in a limited sample in the majors, allowed a 312 expected ISO to lefties. He hasn't allowed any power whatsoever to righties. If you go back to last year, similar splits, 241 expected ISO allowed to lefties, 148 to righties. So even last year when he was really struggling, it was mostly lefties doing the damage against him. It does make Gavin Sheets in particular look very interesting to me. He is getting about 7% ownership. It's not like he's going completely unowned, but he does look like he's the guy that I would single out, where not even because you're just trying to get negative correlation with Manoah, like with most of these other White Sox bats. I think Gavin Sheets like actually just looks good in this spot against Manoah. Next, we have the Cubs rather taking on Milwaukee in Milwaukee. Good hitter's park. Bryce Wilson taking on Shota Imanaga. Bryce Wilson is one of the pitchers that caught my eye when I saw projected ownership and saw how guys were showing up for me. He is 6K. He's not a very good strikeout pitcher. He doesn't have a great matchup against the Cubs. They do strike out. They have the 5th highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They've been about league average in terms of production with a 99 WRC+, but he is 6K, and paying down for SP2 on this slate really isn't the worst idea. So you can see he's projected for around 11% ownership, showed up around 17% of the time for me. I think anybody that's been watching these shows knows that generally I think these really cheap pitchers are just under-owned in general, but that doesn't necessarily, like I was saying with Flexen, doesn't actually lead to me just jamming them in tournaments, because again, you're not just trying to find the most under-owned guys everywhere and play them. But I do think he is going a little bit under-owned just because of how cheap he is. Imanaga on the other side, getting about 20% ownership, showed up in about 15% of the lineups that I built. If you can find the salary for him, I have no issue with it whatsoever, especially on this slate where, again, pitching is questionable. He has been excellent this year. 27.8% K percentage, 3.12 xFIP. He's only walked 4% of guys, 23.4 K minus BB percentage. He has been great. Now, obviously, he's very difficult to project. He is outperforming his projections so far in his rookie season. So we don't really know if he's going to come back down to earth, when he's going to come back down to earth, but everything he's done so far has been very impressive. There's not really anything that you're looking at in his underlying numbers that suggest that he's been incredibly lucky or anything like that. There is certainly a good chance that he's just better than projections are giving him credit for. Only a 112 expected ISO allowed to lefties, only 126 to righties, almost an identical strikeout percentage between 27.5% and 28% against both sides of the plate. So there's no splits issues here or anything. The only two negatives, I guess, for Imanaga here are that he is $10,600 and he is facing a Brewers lineup that is just good. Milwaukee against left-handed pitching since the start of last season, they do rank 8th in strikeout percentage at 23%. They have a 103 WRC plus. They've been excellent against right-handed pitching so far this year. That obviously doesn't have to do with Imanaga specifically, but you do tend to see splits kind of come together, especially when you're talking about a team like the Brewers, where a lot of their best hitters are right-handed. It doesn't set up as a team that you would necessarily expect to be a lot better against righties than lefties. So I do think this is a good offense, a tough spot, but very good pitcher. The Cubs, while Wilson is getting some ownership, the Cubs look good to me as well. They are reasonably priced. Wilson doesn't miss a lot of bats. The park is good for hitting. 22.8% K percentage to lefties this year, 20% to righties, but he has allowed a 261 expected ISO to lefties, only 114 to righties. If you go back to last year, 210 expected ISO to lefties, 139 to righties. So similar splits there. It makes Mike Tauchman look pretty good, assuming he's at the top of the order. Ian Happ is cheap. Happy to get there. Cody Bellinger is going to look good. And then you get some right-handed bats where it's not as good a matchup for Christopher Morel or Nico Horner as it is for those lefties, but they are still fairly priced. They do fit pretty nicely into lineups, Seiya Suzuki as well. So the Cubs look like a pretty solid stack in your non-Bryce Wilson lineups. And then you do get the added benefit of 10% or so of the field having him. So you do get that negative correlation as well. They are showing up 4th most often in the lineups I built as far as 5-man stacks go. So happy to get to them. Milwaukee showing up middle of the pack just based on their talent level. Again, Imanaga is a very good pitcher. I'm not looking to target against him because I think he's bad or anything like that, but you are getting a talented, low-owned offense against a popular pitcher. There's always merit to that. Kansas City taking on the Twins in Minnesota. Seth Lugo is on the mound at $9,600 on DraftKings for Kansas City. Bailey Ober is going for the Twins at $8K. A little bit more ownership coming into Ober. He's getting about 23% ownership. I think the field's pretty much spot on there. Ober is a good pitcher, 26% K percentage, 3.92 xFIP. It's not a very good strikeout matchup at all. Kansas City ranks 26th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year at just north of 19%. 95 WRC plus. Obviously, some talented young hitters in this lineup, but that price tag just looks good for Ober. On the other side, Lugo, I think, is going a little bit over-owned here. He is a good pitcher, but 9,600 is a pretty healthy price tag for a guy that has only struck out 21.5% of hitters this year. He does have a 3.7 xFIP. He is a good pitcher as far as limiting production, limiting runs, but he just hasn't shown you that level of strikeout stuff that other pitchers in his price range generally do. Minnesota's active roster this year, middle of the pack, ranks 14th in strikeout percentage. It's not like you're getting a matchup with the Mariners or something like that. So it's not that if Lugo's just landing in some lineups, I hate getting to him. I think he's perfectly fine. It's just that I think I'm going to have trouble prioritizing that price tag when I can pay down for some other pitching, including Ober on the other side of this game, or I can potentially get to somebody like Imanaga at a little bit higher price tag who just gives you better strikeout stuff. Offensively, I wouldn't expect to get to too much of this game. Kansas City is a team that, I generally get to a lot, but it's not a very good matchup here with Ober. They also, I don't believe, have Vinny Pasquantino, who left early the other day. Yeah, he's not in their lineup, so that waters it down a little bit. Adam Frazier is batting cleanup, unless this is a mistake, at 2,600. I'm trying to confirm that quickly, but if he's actually batting cleanup, you can look at it one of two ways. It makes this stack less appealing. He is batting cleanup. It makes this stack less appealing because your cleanup hitter doesn't hit for power and isn't a very good hitter in general. On the other side, you can argue the value standpoint. You have a $2,600 second baseman batting cleanup. That's always going to be pretty appealing, but that is an interesting lineup construction for sure. 1 through 3, Garcia, Witt, and Perez in particular. If you're getting to those guys, by all means, go for it. They are really, really good. Ober does give up some power as well. 1.2 home runs allowed per 9 innings so far this season. Has generally given up some, given up some power in the past. 216 expected ISO to righties since the start of last year. 178 this year. Higher expected ISO allowed to righties than lefties. So again, Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez in particular, they are expensive, but they are pretty nice contrarian pieces. You don't have to full stack Kansas City necessarily to get negative correlation with Ober. You can just get to two really good right-handed hitters in Witt, Perez, hope that they do some damage against him, and then have higher probability 5-man stacks elsewhere. So I like that approach. On the other side for Minnesota, I don't have too much interest there. The pricing on Correa and Kirilloff looks pretty nice, with Correa coming in at 4K on DraftKings, Kirilloff hitting third at 3,500. I don't mind that, but like I was saying before with Lugo, my issues with him from a DFS standpoint have nothing to do with his ability to limit run scoring or production. It's purely a strikeout thing. That being said, he has allowed a 192 expected ISO to righties since last year, 178 to righties this year, or to lefties rather. This year, a 216 expected ISO to righties. So it's not like you can't get to him for home runs. It's not my favorite guy to be taking hitters against, but he will give up some power. So if you wanted to mix in, I think especially Correa and Kirilloff, it does make some sense. Kind of like I was saying with Witt and Perez on the other side. Then we get to Coors. We have the Guardians taking on the Rockies. Logan Allen is pitching for Cleveland. Going for Colorado is somebody that I don't have listed. Ty Block, I think I accidentally just did not project to pitch because the score was so low that I missed him. One way or the other, you're not playing Ty Block here, I don't think. Logan Allen, I don't expect to be very popular, but I do think he's interesting at 6,900. You can see that he's showing up quite a bit more for me than he's projected to for the field. One reason for that is that I generally do end up projecting him a little bit higher than most places. Some of his stuff this year just stands out and makes him project a little bit better for me. So I'm a little bit higher than I think most industry sources, not all, but most. Also, he's cheap and just not getting ownership. If you're going to get 11% ownership coming into Bryce Wilson, I don't think you can really convince me that Bryce Wilson is 2 times better than Logan Allen is, especially when it's not like Wilson has a great matchup or anything. Granted, pitching in Colorado is obviously as bad as it gets, but 20% K percentage, 4.06 xFIP for Allen this year. He was solid as a rookie last season. I really don't mind using him as a contrarian play in tournaments if you need to pay down a pitcher. I don't think, or I hope that I don't get 21% of him. That seems aggressive, but I do think he's going under-owned here against a weak Rockies team. The Guardians look great. The ownership's going to be the issue. You can see really top to bottom, this team getting a ton of ownership. They are not very expensive for the most part. They are in a great spot going up against Block in Colorado. Jonathan Rodriguez looks like one of your best value plays on the entire slate at 3,200 in Coors Field, assuming that he's hitting 6th or somewhere in that general vicinity. Josh Naylor is priced up. Ramirez, Jimenez, Fry, all relatively expensive, but not really prohibitive, given that you can find hitter value elsewhere, whether it's in the Cleveland lineup or from other teams, and you're just getting them with a massive implied run total in Colorado. Again, the issue is just going to be finding your way, figuring out how to be contrarian elsewhere in your lineup. Maybe pairing them with Logan Allen is one way that you do that on DraftKings, at 5% ownership. Maybe you pair them with like the KC 2-man or 3-man, like I was saying, or Minnesota. Maybe you pair them with the White Sox, do stuff like that. But they look very, very good. If you're playing cash games, you should absolutely be loading up on this team. And you should be trying to figure out how you can do it in tournaments if you can make it work in tournaments, at these ownership levels. But it is certainly problematic when basically the entirety of a stack is getting 15 to 25% ownership because, you're talking about a lineup that has 10 players in it. If 5 of those guys are 15 to 25% owned, and then on top of that, it's not just that their raw ownership is 15 to 25%, it's that they're also going to be in lineups together. So like it's not just, 15% of the field has David Fry. It's, 15% of the field has David Fry, and then also a really high percentage of those lineups have Ramirez and Jimenez and whoever. So like, no matter how you stack them, you're going to end up overlapping with a high percentage of the field. That is, a difficult thing to find ways around, especially in your larger field tournaments. But from a probability standpoint, they certainly look very, very good here. On the other side, not as much ownership coming into Colorado. You have ownership coming into Brendan Rodgers, who is a nice value hitting 2nd. Hunter Goodman, projected for about 10% ownership, batting 9th. But for the most part, not a lot of ownership coming into the Rockies. While I do think that Logan Allen is going under-owned, I think the Rockies make sense in tournaments as well. 228 expected ISO allowed to righties this year from Allen, 180 since the start of last year. Again, you don't have the best hitters in the Rockies lineup, but the game is still in Coors Field. They do still have one of the higher implied run totals on the slate, even though it's not to the same level as Cleveland. And, just not getting nearly as much ownership as Cleveland is. Sorry about that. So next we have the Yankees taking on the Angels in Angel Stadium, which has kind of been playing like the new Coors lately. Tons of runs have been scored in this game or in this stadium. Recently, it's one of the best parks in baseball for hitting. Have some coffee. Just it's harder to find breaks to drink it when I'm the only one talking. We have Luis Gil on the mound for the Yankees, Tyler Anderson on the mound for the Angels. Gil's getting a lot of ownership. It's warranted. You can see that I think he's going a little bit over-owned, but still showing up as one of the more frequent pitchers for me. Excellent strikeout stuff. Scary park, like I said, but 31.7% strikeout percentage is the highest mark on the slate. 3.55 xFIP. Very, very, very good pitcher. Very good pitcher, and happy to get to him where I can. Tyler Anderson on the other side, much more difficult to get to. Tough matchup against the Yankees. Not a great strikeout pitcher, not a great salary, all of that. So interested in Gil, not really interested in Anderson. Really glad I didn't try and do 2 shows today, I guess, because might really not be going well at this point. As far as offenses go, I do like getting to the Yankees here. They're getting some ownership, but not as much, obviously, as Cleveland. Pretty comparable to some other teams that we've talked about. Tyler Anderson's not lights out against lefties, so I do like getting the Juan Soto at low ownership here. You see him actually showing up the most of any Yankee bat for me, and he's not projected for a lot of ownership. Gleyber Torres is cheap. Aaron Judge is Aaron Judge. Like, it goes without saying that the Yankees are just going to be a really high upside offense that you can get to. And for the most part, just not a ton of ownership. So that's pretty appealing. Anderson does have that good changeup that can mitigate right-handed power. But I'm not too concerned about that with guys like Stanton and Judge. And then finally, mercifully, wrapping things up, Houston taking on the Mariners in Seattle. Obviously a very good strikeout matchup here for Justin Verlander. I expect him to be popular. He's obviously had some issues this year, but I think it's more likely than not that he turns things around going forward. His stuff has still been good. The strikeout numbers just aren't there yet. 21% K percentage. He's given up power. He has a 4.8 xFIP. Obviously, all of those things are reason for concern, but you do get a good park to pitch in. You get a very good strikeout matchup against the best or highest strikeout rate against right-handed pitching in baseball this year for Seattle. 8,800 is a very fair price tag. So Verlander looks good. I understand why he's getting the ownership, even though he has struggled some this year. On the other side, really, really tough matchup for a very good pitcher in George Kirby. Getting about 15% ownership, showed up around 10% for me at 8,500. On a lot of slates, I think that you would probably not be that interested in Kirby because of the matchup. But on this slate, where most of the pitchers we've talked about have some sort of caveat, whether it's just that they're really expensive, or they have a tough matchup, or they're in a tough park, or some combination of all of that, and it's only a 7-game slate in general, I think that Kirby makes some sense here. Now, the issue, of course, is that the Astros have a lot of really good hitters, and they don't strike out. 17.7% K percentage against right-handed pitching this year to go along with their 114 WRC plus. There's no really redeeming, redeeming quality for Kirby's matchup, but he is a good pitcher. Offensively, I think it's not a particularly appealing game at all. This park sucks for hitting home runs. The case that you would make is that Verlander has been giving up power and he is popular, and the Mariners do have power, but outside of, negative correlation, I don't really have any case to be made for for Seattle. For Houston, I think you can make the case just that they are really talented, but Kirby is also very good. Again, this park sucks. You're never wrong if you decide to just play low-owned, Tucker and Alvarez and Bregman and all these guys. But, Kirby, a good pitcher overall. Park isn't good for hitting. 158 expected ISO. Sorry, that was Verlander. 216 expected ISO allowed to lefties by Kirby so far this year. 175 to righties. If you go back to last year, it drops a bit to 182 to lefties, 161 to righties. So again, if you wanted to just try and get a very low-owned like Kyle Tucker, I think that's fine. But with how many good hitting spots there are on this slate, it's tough to prioritize Houston. So to quickly recap, hopefully before I lose my voice again, top pitching on this slate, I think pitching's pretty spread out in general because most guys have something working against them. But Mackenzie Gore, Bailey Ober, Alek Manoah, Luis Gil, Justin Verlander, the guys that I would say I'm most confident in. I like Logan Allen as a contrarian play in large field tournaments. I don't think if he's 5% owned, I just don't think he's getting enough in the context of this slate. As far as stacks go, Cleveland is very clearly your number one, but you need to figure out what to do about their ownership. Sean Jeezy said, any thoughts on playing Cleveland stack in high dollar single entry? It's tough because, like, on the one hand, it's going to be smaller fields, but the ownership's also going to be more concentrated. I think it's likely that I would end up maybe running like a 2-man or something with a lower owned stack. Although they do just look like such a high probability stack, you could make the case for maybe if I were to 5-man stack Cleveland, I would almost definitely in a high dollar single entry, I would almost definitely be pairing them with a team that negatively correlates with a pitcher, because that way at least you are knocking off a percentage of the field. It gives you a little bit easier path to winning than just saying like, oh, I'm going to make the best Cleveland lineup. Like, good luck with that if you're not doing anything else to help yourself. But if you say, like, I'm going to 5-man stack Cleveland, but I know they're popular, so I'm going to run it back with a 3-man White Sox stack against Manoah, or, a Braves 2-man against Gore or something like that, at least then you're giving yourself a path where a high percentage of the Cleveland stacks aren't going to be good if your team is good because they lost their pitcher. That's probably how I would handle it. If I went the 5-man stack route, making sure I paired them with a secondary stack that negatively correlates with one of the popular pitchers that you're not using. Beyond Cleveland, Toronto looks good. I really like the Yankees. I like the Nats from a value standpoint. Cubs look solid. I like Colorado, even though I also think Allen is going underowned. I think Colorado is going a little bit underowned as well. So I'll throw them in there as a contrarian team. As far as home run pick goes, I'll take CJ Abrams against the rookie in Atlanta. And that's all I have. I don't think I could say anything else if I really wanted to at this point. Thank you for bearing with me throughout the show. Hopefully I will have my voice back tomorrow. Weird set of games again tomorrow, but I will be talking about them in the morning. So hopefully I'll have my voice back. Check out that show. Thanks again for bearing with me on this one. Good luck on your lineups tonight.